Okay, I'm Maral Kazazian, and I'm the director of ARPA International Film Festival. Welcome to this Q&A. Today, we're going to be talking to Stephanie Ayanian, who's the film producer and director of the amazing documentary, What Will Become of Us? And I am so excited to be talking to you because when I watched this for the first time, I just, I was just mesmerized with the way you started this whole film, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that later. But first, I want you to introduce yourself and introduce us to your film.
Thanks, Maral, and thanks for having me. It's just, I feel so honored to be at ARPA International Film Festival, and I wish that all of my colleagues could be joining me for the Q&A today. So I'm Stephanie Ayanian, and I was born in Northern California. Both of my parents are Armenian American. They were actually born in Fresno. And I moved to central Pennsylvania in the mid-1980s, lived much of my life where Penn State University is, and it was a community that didn't have a lot of Armenians. And ultimately ended up in San Francisco as an adult for a while. I did pursue filmmaking in undergraduate school at Penn State. And in my 20s, ended up back in Philadelphia for a Master's of Fine Arts at Temple University in film and media arts so that I could have a terminal degree to be able to teach filmmaking at the university level. I love teaching and I love filmmaking, and I wanted to be able to do both, and documentary is one of the ways that I'm able to do that.
Wonderful. The thing that really, I guess, got me with this film is when the film first starts and you talk about, with John Simonian, talks about the dropout rate. And it just makes it so easy to understand what's happening to us in the diaspora. So how did you get that whole idea?
Well, believe it or not, John actually found us because he had heard about our film. At the time, it was called A New Armenia, and we were doing a lot of social media outreach about the project, trying to fundraise for it and trying to find new stories to consider. And so we had talked to people at churches and people in community groups, and I believe it was the author Nancy Krikorian who told me about a cooking school that John and his family were hosting at a church in New York City. And so I reached out to John to hear more about his story about running this cooking school to teach people in New York traditional Armenian recipes. And he came back to me with this, concept of the dropout rate. And I thought, wow, this really says a lot about how so many Armenians feel in the diaspora. And so we decided to film a story with him. And unfortunately, we weren't able to include his entire story in the feature film because we had way too much footage. But the dropout rate resonated so much with us, and we thought it was such an important story to share, especially at the beginning of the film. So that's how we started out.
Tell me a little bit about how did you get so many interesting people involved in your film?
Well, we were very lucky. So not only did we, contact just communities and community leaders around the country, but Armenians, they know a lot of people and they are related to a lot of people. So by word of mouth, I was introduced to hundreds upon hundreds of Armenians. And I read newspaper articles, and I watched, other films, and I just spoke to a lot of people. And ultimately, just with the weaving of our community, I found these specific stories and then introduced them to my filmmaking partners. My filmmaking partners are actually not Armenian. And so I had to come back with these stories that I thought were interesting. And we were specifically looking for stories of people in America who were doing something significant with Armenian culture to try to preserve it today. And they had to be doing it in a way where we could capture it on camera, not something that they did 10 years ago or 2 years ago or 6 months ago, but something where we could actually see them doing it and portray it on camera. So I would take stories back and I would pitch it to my non-Armenian filmmaking team. And I would say, what do you think is the best way to captivate an audience. And so we ended up with the stories that you see in the feature.
Did you learn anything from making this film?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, you know, it's interesting because one of the reasons that I wanted to make the film was to celebrate who we are today, but also because I think that, you know, sometimes when you are in a diasporan community, you're judged about how Armenian you are, or how Indian you are, or how, you know, Egyptian you are, or whatever, right? And so I had felt that there was this kind of judgment within our community, as there are in most diasporan communities. And I wanted to kind of investigate that a little bit, and not only just see how other people felt, but also see if it left a lasting impression upon me. And so that was something that was really interesting to investigate through interviews and conversations with people. But I can't believe how much I learned. I learned about history, and I learned about, you know, amazing human beings all over the United States, but also internationally in Armenia. One of our stories takes us there. Yeah, it was an immeasurable learning experience for me. And I'm so proud to have met the people that I've met. And I feel so lucky to be able to share the stories that we've been able to share.
The next thing I wanted to ask you was, you know, what is your filmmaking background, and what films most inspired or influenced you to do what you're doing, and why?
That's an excellent question. So I went to undergraduate school at Penn State for filmmaking. I didn't know when I was little that I wanted to be a filmmaker. I wasn't one of those people who at the age of 5 realized I wanted to make films. So I discovered filmmaking during my sophomore year at Penn State University, and graduated, you know, 3 years later with a film degree, and started working on film productions and loved it. And so that made me pursue my master's in fine arts in film and media arts from Temple University. And when I was done there, I taught a little while at the university level, but then a PBS station at Penn State University asked me to come and work as a full-time producer director, working for national projects for their station. And it was an opportunity that most filmmakers just can't pass up, to get a full-time job salaried with benefits at a major educational institution at a PBS station. I thought, yeah, okay, I got to take this. So that job was fantastic because I got to meet so many different filmmakers, but also get access to the PBS world and understand how you make a PBS film. It also taught me how to fundraise for a large educational documentary. My colleagues at that station were just outstanding, and I can't believe everything that I've learned from them. But so I was able to make some educational documentaries while I was there, and continued to work on independent features and shorts along the way. Sometimes they were documentaries, sometimes they were fiction. So my work has, you know, screened internationally, but a lot of the work that I do now focuses on, you know, educational content that often goes out through PBS or other online media.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's such a beautiful story. When did you learn that this is your calling, your passion, the filmmaking?
So believe it or not, when I started school at Penn State University, I hadn't picked a major, and I wanted to take a number of test courses. And so I tried everything from psychology to physics. And I loved them, but I didn't think that I wanted to make careers out of them. And so I was sitting in the dorms one day and complaining about whatever film was on television at that time. And my roommate said, well, if you don't like it, why don't you make films? She said, you know, why don't you just become a filmmaker? And I said, do they have that major here? And she said, yeah. And so I said, oh, that's a good idea. And so I took my first film class, and from there, it's history. So early on as an Armenian filmmaker, I started to look for other Armenian filmmakers that were making significant work. And at the time, the person who was most inspiring to me in that realm was Ayanian. He was doing independent films in a way that were very well respected by the international community. And so I studied his work a lot actually in graduate school. So he was an inspiration. But I also am inspired by so many filmmakers that I've met in the diaspora, people that are young and of all ages, you know, men and women, some in Armenia, some here. And they just have been outstanding human beings to watch their films and learn about the culture through them as well. But traditionally, being in America, many of the filmmakers that have inspired me have also been American. Steven Soderbergh is actually one of my favorite filmmakers, and the way that he makes films continues to inspire me, and I continue to study his career as well.
Anything you're working on right now that you can tell us about? Or
So I've actually just started sending out grant applications and fundraising for some films that will come out of the footage that we have from What Will Become of Us. Because we had enough footage to actually show like a 10-part series, we are able to, especially during the time of COVID-19, go back to the edit room and edit together some more stories. So the first story that we are intending to release is going to be about Father Armanog, who is an Armenian priest in the Los Angeles area, who is working with refugees and trying to help them feel at home in the United States. And so we've already finished filming with him because he was supposed to be in the feature, but because his story didn't make it in, we're gonna finish his story first. And then after we finish his story, we will complete a few other stories and then weave them together to make another feature.
Wow, wonderful, that's exciting. That is so exciting, can't wait to see that. It's gonna be wonderful. Well, I wish you best of success in the future, and make sure you submit them to ARPA.
Thank you so much. And too bad we can't be in person, but it's awesome that it's happening this way so that I can help promote the festival to an international audience.
Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.